regarding transactional disclosures.
Yes,
So-
there's a section of the code. I had provided everybody with a memo with regards to Chapter 48 of the code. There's a transactional disclosure requirement. Apparently, that hasn't been done. Nobody's been filing it. It's supposed to, the way it's written now, it's any time an employee of the city does any transaction with anyone, they're required to notify the Board of Ethics. Then the Board of Ethics looks into it to see if there's a conflict. It seems like because it's not one of the annual financial disclosures that everybody here has to fill out, this is on a case-by-case basis for those employees who don't have that annual disclosure form. It should be, the intent of it should have been transactions dealing with the city. And unfortunately, the section of the code is missing that key element. So what I've done...
It says with anyone,
It says with anyone.
Look,
So what I've done is I've redrafted it. I provided the proposed language to present before you and actually spelled out the process, because what it does is you provide the transactional disclosure form to the clerk. The clerk then provides it to the Board of Ethics. The Board of Ethics then considers it. If they deem that there's any kind of a potential conflict, then the appointing authority for that employee makes a determination. So if it's an employee, it would be Richard. If it's, for example, if it were me, it would be the council. If it's another council member, it should be the remaining council member. So I've spelled all of that out, kind of made it a little more clear as to the fact that it should be in relation to work dealing specifically with the city, not with
any entity that does business with the city.
any entity. Yes, and I narrowed it down to the properties owned by the city, any contracts that the city has an interest, public officials of the city, employer, supervisor, supervisee positions, and any employees that are subordinates of another employee. So if there are any relations in those regard, they should notify. An employee has an obligation to notify the city. As it stands now, it's just the language, like I said, it's never been followed, so there has been no nobody's really understood it, I guess. So since this has come up and it's been brought to my attention, I thought it would be better to actually clarify it in the code.
I still don't understand it, but
Yeah, I know.
what if an employee went to Kathleen's Tea Room and wanted to cater their son's birthday party? That has to be disclosed?
It should be disclosed to see if there's a potential conflict, because, so for example, if a council member wanted to do, I'm trying to think of an example.
But we handle that in our financial disclosures annually.
You do, but
So
sometimes
what's-
there are things that come up on a routine basis that wouldn't be covered in the transactional disclosure. What the transactional disclosure requirement requires you to get an answer from the Board of Ethics prior to doing the work. So for example, if a city employee wanted to, say they were a contractor, and they wanted to bid on doing work on a city firehouse, then prior to putting in that bid, they must file this transactional disclosure, give a written statement about what the work would be, who is involved, and provide that to the clerk. Then the Ethics Board has to
Well, that's
consider it
pretty-
and whether or not there's a
That's
conflict.
pretty clear, but, 2 o'clock in the morning, if I get a call that somebody that I went to high school with, their kid was arrested up in Dutchess on a DWI,
If it's an employee,
if it's an employee of the city,
then yes, you would have to get an ethical,
but I have a
because the concern is that there's an appearance of impropriety. So you want to make sure that the Ethics Board considers it to make sure that there's not an appearance of impropriety. So if an employee's child were to
No,
get
I have a-
arrested, well, this is a requirement right now. As it
It's worse
stands,
now, actually.
it's anyone. So
I mean, listen,
That doesn't make any sense.
that doesn't make any sense, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention.
Anyone, you have to let the
Anyone.
city know. I mean,
So
get
if
ready
I
for
want to
the
have
list.
a party at the tea room, you would have to get permission?
Yes,
Really?
yes.
Wow.
Or if you wanted to, do any work for anybody.
If I wanted to get a
that
side
works for
job
the
at
city.
Cumberland
Yeah.
Farms
Just
over
give me
where
that
I live,
second.
then you don't have to, well, the problem is that you have to have some kind of control, because there are city employees who may have jobs with the city that should not occur because there are ethical violations in that.
Well, here's
And
how-
that's why that's why the Ethics Board
But
was
here's how you
created.
handle that. I mean, any individual to a limit that is in charge of a contract or that handles business for the city, up to you want to make it $25,000, $20,000, whatever the limit you want to put, because not every individual right now fills out a financial disclosure.
Correct.
But I
But-
don't think you have to go that far. I think if you just put in any city, because now it's just, it's flat.
Anything.
Yeah, but that covers every single employee in the city. What I'm saying is most
but
city
that's-
employees don't supervise or control contracts.
No, 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 but I
So-
think what she's saying is, like, our disclosure is we can't do any
Right.
kind of whatever.
Anything.
This would be the same thing.
Right.
For the, basically now it's saying Joe can't come to the tea room and have a cup of tea.
Yeah,
Or-
What
No,
I'm
no,
saying
no,
is-
no, that's...
But what I'm
that's
saying is
not-
what I'm saying is, what this would entail is it would cover every single employee for the city.
Right.
Most importantly, the ones that don't fill out a financial disclosure like we do. We fill out financial disclosures, so anything we do during the course of a year should be disclosed at the end of that year anyhow or going into the next year. So technically...
But you're also required prior to doing any work. So, for example, if you wanted to have a party and you wanted Kathleen's Tea Room to cater it, then that should go through the ethics board to make sure that there's not a conflict.
I know, it's absurd. But what I'm saying is that
Oh,
what it should be is anybody in a position that administers funds for the city or is in control of a contract.
Well, I mean, the problem is, if you have any position
Because
where
that's in line
there's
with the state, if you look at the state ethics code, that's how that's written.
if you have, that, this is, I got this from the county ethics code, and what the issue is, if you have somebody who is in a power of authority within the city, and you have somebody who's a subordinate to that person, and who's doing work for that person, or vice versa, then somebody else who says, hey, look it, Joe got a promotion, and John didn't get the promotion, and it's because he did the work for you on the side. You know, that's the issue. And I'm not saying that it's always going to be a
Yeah.
conflict, but the ethics board was created to investigate issues like this, to see if there is a conflict. It's just to cover the bases of the city. It's to make sure that the city isn't allowing things that are clearly unethical occur. Because right now, this has been in the code, but nobody's been abiding by it. Pam didn't even know that these forms were supposed to come to her. There was no form in existence. It just requires a written explanation of the work that you're doing with the city. So
So you drafted something?
I drafted something. It was provided to you guys in your packet. And if you want to consider it, then I would schedule it. It would obviously be a
Can you give us
local law.
Can you give us a week to review it?
Yeah.
We'll take a
Yeah, and
look
then
at
we
it.
can wait until, and then we can put it on for a public hearing after that, after you consider it.
It's got to go to public hearing?
Yeah, because it's an amendment to the code.
Schedule it and we'll talk it through
Well,
then.
I mean,
I'll take
there's
it.
other laws that are more important, like attorney-client privilege.
Mhm.
You know, if Richard's wife came to me and wanted a divorce, and I wouldn't take the case, but if I represented somebody on this council, or some people in the city that I do represent in matrimonials,
But the
I'm not disclosing that.
The
to
disclosure
anybody.
to the ethics board is confidential as well.
Well, but does it supersede my attorney-client privilege? That's
That's something to consider.
Special case.
Yeah, that's
The
a
problem-
unique
the problem is
situation.
You're special.
What's on the books now is actually worse than what's
Right.
being proposed, so something really needs to be done. What's on the books now says you basically can't do anything
You can't do any outside work,
at all.
other than with the city, as an
So
employee,
this
a
would be
council person.
This may not be
anything.
the answer, but it attempts to narrow the
I'm gonna pay
focus a
my
little
mortgage.
bit.
All right, we'll take a look at it.
Maybe work through it, maybe put it on again for another
But if
Yeah, we
it's
can put it
got,
on
if
for
it's
the
got to
next-
go for, I don't want to delay it, but if it's got to go for a
Public
public
hearing.
hearing, put it through the process, and that gives us a couple weeks to keep a look.
I can schedule it for, put it on for a resolution next week for a public hearing.
Call public hearing. Okay. All right. The next item is a continuation of the discussion about the opportunity